Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, and where we chat with thought leaders about business, life, and all points in between. And today is a special treat, very special, as we have someone who, in my book, is the authority on thought leadership, the woman who literally wrote the book on the topic titled Ready to be a Thought Leader, Denise Brosseau, a renowned thought leadership strategist, keynote speaker, executive coach. She's inspired tens of thousands of people worldwide through appearances at Microsoft, Google, Grace Hopper Conference, and much more. Former Stanford Business School lecturer on credibility, influence, and thought leadership. She's produced LinkedIn learning classes that have reached more than 200,000 global learners, and she's the founder of the Thought Leadership Lab. Denise, wow, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. It makes me sound old to hear all of that. I've been at this a long time.
Yeah, experienced, I think, is the word.
That's the word. I like
it. I just want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed your book. I read a ton of business books, and some are really good, some are okay, but the amount of research and thought, of course, that went into your book was just amazing, and I recommend it to anybody who is interested at all about thought leadership.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right into the topic, which is executive thought leadership programs and why they fail. I reached out to Denise, and I shared this stat. I'm going to bring it up here, that executives are reporting a gap on thought leadership strategy and quality. And I think what really jumped out at me about this is that 83%, and this is from a Harris poll, 83% of decision makers create thought leadership, okay? But only 28% say that they have a robust they think they have a robust thought leadership strategy. And only 20% say they thought it is very effective. So it's like here it says 78% agree. Most organizations check the box on thought leadership, but they don't push the envelope on thought leadership. So I shared this with Denise, and I was like, Denise, what do you think about this? And let's just start out, Denise, with your reaction to those numbers.
Yeah, and the more I reflect on those numbers, the more it reminds me that what we haven't often instilled in people is what is thought leadership. And for me, thought leadership is about building trust, right? This isn't about pushing content out there. It's not about having beautiful visuals. It is about building trust. And if you don't essentially understand what that means with your own audience, about helping people see the way forward, helping people understand how we're going to get to this future that you envision, it's no surprise that we see that kind of data.
Right. So let's talk a little bit then about the trust building. And I mean, because I think people are dialed into the strategy, but if you read your book, that's just one component of it. So let's talk a little bit about the thought leadership programs, why you think they fail. What are the first steps people need to do to transform those thought leadership efforts that may be failing or they're not getting the results they want into this trusted, respected company brand and executive brand?
Yeah. And I often think back to the earliest parts of my career when companies, like I worked at Motorola, were trying to push through quality initiatives, or sort of in the middle part of my career when people were trying to push through CRM was the new tool and everybody should adopt it. And I saw the same behaviors, and we're seeing the same behaviors in these initiatives around thought leadership, that if you're trying to create a cross-silo initiative, it's more difficult for companies, right? It's very easy for one department to point the finger at the other department. And it's also very easy to under-resource a new initiative, that you give one small team enough to get started, but then you don't necessarily resource over time. And so if you think back of the failures of a number of these cross-silo initiatives across companies, the same challenges happen here. So what I'm often thinking about is we tend to not begin with a very good reporting relationship with thought leadership. We simply tell people, go be a thought leader. We
Right.
don't give them resources, training, or any clear time on their calendars to do this. Secondly, you often stick the thought leadership person who's responsible over in marketing, and they don't actually have direct access to the content that they need, or the new thoughts that need to be shared, and they don't have any pull to get the others to do it. So you have a cross-silo problem, you have a resource problem, and you have an understanding problem. Like what is it? What does it mean in your day-to-day life to step into the role of thought leader? It's about being able to codify lessons learned. It's being able to simplify and create language that others can repeat, and tools and materials that people can learn from. So it's not just look at me, we're fabulous over here. It's actually giving people useful case studies, giving people useful processes and systems and visuals that allow them to build on what your organization is doing.
Right. Well, one of those things we were talking about prior to the show starting is I read the book ROI of Thought Leadership, and they were defining they kind of had a very narrow definition of thought leadership, and they said it was, at least in relation to what they were proving, was that they could generate a 14-to-1 ROI in thought leadership, but they were very specific on the types of thought leadership. Theirs was all research based, okay, and it had to have some sort of quantitative research involved. And I think that just the whole definition of thought leadership might be something that people are a little fuzzy on. So could you kind of walk us through your definition of thought leadership, both in regards to that ROI of thought leadership and then what you've seen to be successful?
Well, one of the things that we have to define is the difference between what we call academic thought leadership, which I think is what that book is talking about, which is sort of double-blind studies and long-term look at something over a great deal of time. That isn't what most companies are doing. And the way I define thought leadership and what I see when it's effective in companies is when we're trying to transform an industry, we're trying to transform the way people think about the future of their particular field or their industry, and that an organization is part of and helping to drive that change, not necessarily by themselves. So let's go back to some of the most effective thought leadership transformations in my career was when we moved from software in a box on the shelf, right, to software as a service. And I remember because I come from the software industry, right, I remember, here is the head of Salesforce going around everywhere he can talking about SaaS. And people are like, are you kidding? Like, we would never put our data in the cloud. We have our software tools. We've got, everything's done. And he had to create not just a new way of thinking within his own organization, but he had to get kind of acolytes. He had to get people out there evangelizing these ideas. So it was way beyond Salesforce. It was not just their own clients and customers and people who were using their tools, but he had to get people to think differently. To me, that is what true thought leadership looked like. If you get people to think differently or do something differently, that is what thought leadership is. And we don't need double-blind studies for that. We need people to lead the way. We need people to show a new set of behaviors and actions and a positive outcome from that. So when I try to create initiatives within companies, I try to give them examples, like the CEO of Chobani, who built this whole, I think it was called the Tent Partnership, where it was all about getting companies to hire refugees. And he himself had been a refugee, and he was really pushing for others to hire refugees, and ended up impacting 250,000 jobs across America by bringing together a whole bunch of CEOs who all had a similar belief. Not all of them were refugees, but giving them the tools and the understanding of the value these people brought to companies, and giving them initiatives and clarifying the steps that he himself had taken in his own organization to make these folks successful. And to me, that's That's the kind of thought leadership I want. People who are seeing big change ahead and the necessity to behave differently and giving us the steps to get there.
Does it have to be something with that kind of significant impact? I really gravitated to what you just said about trying to get people to think differently about something. So, there's so many companies out there, and a lot of people do, especially like I've done a lot of work in manufacturing. They do a lot of what their competition does. In fact, they look at their websites and try and replicate what they do. Is there room for them to not necessarily do some sort of, a SaaS kind of disruptive approach to business, but kind of find a nuanced thought leadership and maybe not expect such dramatic changes? Have you seen anything along those lines, or what would you say to maybe a smaller company that maybe isn't thinking in quite such grandiose terms?
Yeah, and not everybody is, right?
Right.
These are big examples that help me illustrate my point, but I don't think that the typical CEO, A, thinks that way, or B, puts that kind of time into it. So could a small manufacturing initiative build thought leadership? I think when they have done something within their organization that is replicable. So for example, let's say they have an engineering process or a manufacturing process that they've improved on. It doesn't have to be life-changing. It could be, however, that it's saving, like they're implementing robots or they're implementing AI and they're taking some of the new technical processes and systems and showing us how hard it is and the stumbles that they've made, as well as the successes that they have. Going back to my initial definition of building trust, that's what builds trust. You don't have to tell me that you've conquered the world. Give me a step-by-step process and take me on your journey. And we think of thought leadership as being sage from the stage. I'm coming to give you my wisdom. And I think of it as guide from the side, like take us on the journey with you of what you're learning and how you're transforming your company, how you're building new workforce initiatives, how you're motivating people to come back into the office after work remotely, how you're creating a better culture, how you're creating communication tools that are more effective within your industry. All of these can be relatively small initiatives, but they're hard work. And if somebody else is going to try them, wouldn't it be better if they could learn from what you've already done and not have to go reinvent the wheel each time? That's what I hope leaders are doing.
Guide from the side. I like that, and we'll be stealing it quite often.
I think I stole it from someone. I'm not claiming it as my own. It's working for me.
Right. Speaking of working, let's talk about the first steps that you would think, because now if in your book you lay out this beautiful framework for becoming a thought leader. What would you say to somebody who's tuning in and saying, okay, I'm interested, we do something differently, Denise? We are impacting our industry and our customers and our employees. We're doing some things differently, and I want to talk about them. What's the first steps you would say they need to take to transform their thought leadership efforts into this trusted, respected brand?
So often when I'm working with a client, the first thing we're doing is thinking about the audience that they're serving. Like, who is it that they want to have following them? And who is it that they want on the journey with them? And so we're digging in. It's not just, I want other CEOs. Like, okay, let's get a lot more clear. And what are these people? The second question then is, what do these people believe today? And why do they believe it? And what do we want them to believe or do? And what is that transformation that you had within your own organization, with your own people, to get that change to happen? Because most work around thought leadership is about some sort of a transformation. As I said, it doesn't have to be giant, but people have to start thinking newly and doing something differently. Well, what did it take in your own company to make that happen? Because what you're trying to help other people do is make a similar transformation. So the more we can dig in and figure out what it took, the more we can then explain it and help others to make that similar transformation. Were there tools, was there training, was there some sort of just a fresh look at how you were doing things? Was there a new a system you adopted from the outside? Was there a book you read? Like what did you do to get there? And can you share that with me? Can you break down the steps that you and your team took? So those are some of the first elements. Then the second piece is, okay, let's say we understand that. Next is, how do we communicate it? Let's figure out what are some clear communication messages, and you only need 3. You don't need 30, 3 clear messages that you want to be saying to people, and some proof points under each of those that makes me believe that you're not just saying this, but you have something to back it up. You had some ROI shift, or you had some change in the way your company operated, your way your talent was hired, or the way your team worked more effectively. And so once we have our messages, we also want to think about what is it we want to say, but we maybe can't say out loud. There's often things that it's kind of what I call the hidden message. Like, what is it I really want to say, but I don't want to scare people off, or I don't want to offend them. And how can I make sure that I am communicating my clear messages and even my hidden message without having to be too bold? So you're probably wondering, what do I mean by that?
Yeah, let's have an example of that.
Let me see an example. So let's imagine, I think about one of my earliest clients. We were working on a workforce development initiative in the utility industry. And we had some clear messages on what we thought was needed in order to bring a new process to work for bringing in new hires. What we really wanted to say was, we've got to get rid of our nepotistic behavior here, because everyone was only hired through nepotism.
Okay.
We couldn't say that, right? That was the way the company hired. They only hired brothers, uncles, and cousins of people who worked at the company. But you can't say that. So instead, we had to have a positive spin on it, that there was a much broader diversity across the state of California, and we wanted our workforce to look like the people who they were working with in our communities. And so that was our positive way of saying, hey, there's more people that are out there that don't look and don't come from the exact same communities as our existing employees, and let's broaden the perspective. So you often have something like that you can't really say. So I'm even wanting to think about, what's the message you're not saying, and what are we saying instead?
Okay.
So that's sort of the middle part, is the figuring out the message. And then the third piece, of course, is there a platform that we can start testing our ideas? So it could be an industry conference. It could be a trade association luncheon where you can test in the hallways with people. Here's some things we're thinking about. Here's some things we've done, and testing it with others. It could be you have a couple of other CEOs that you tend to hang with, and a place where you want to start testing these messages and starting to see what resonates and paying attention. What we tend to do as thought leaders is we get out there and we talk a lot, but we don't always make sure people are listening. So, right. I always go back to the Jerry Seinfeld. He did a documentary a few years ago in which he showed his entire process for developing a big show that he was going to do at Radio City Music Hall. Every single night of the week, practically, he went to a different small venue, just a corner comedy show, and he would test his jokes, and he'd test them, and he'd refine them, and he'd test them, and he'd refine them. That's the process for thought leadership. It isn't just push out our best ideas. We have to test them. We have to make sure that people are paying attention, and that they might pick it up and go, wow, that's a clever idea. I should think about it that way. That's what we're trying on our messaging for size, as it were. So
let's circle back to the messaging and the testing, which I completely agree with. You're speaking to the digital marketer in me. You said you don't need a ton of messages. You need 3. Do you mean by that you need 3 pillars? Yes. Three pillar messages. You're going to come at those 3 messages in multiple ways and multiple executions. Is that?
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that I come from marketing, right? I learned about these sort of pillars of messaging many years ago. And I have learned that it works just as well when you're doing your thought leadership, because it is in some ways the same process. So we often have sort of three key themes, three key ideas that you are trying to articulate. And then, of course, there's going to be some ways in which you might say that to a group of CEOs, and different ways in which you might say that on a Twitter platform or equivalent. So this idea of finding those key themes is the beginning process. And the truth is, even within those core elements, we don't need 90 ways to say things. We need to be able to communicate those messages in a longer format, a shorter format, in a more informal format, a more formal format. Yes, okay, all of those. But people tend to come at that more easily than just coming up with their three core pillars of messaging. That seems to be the harder part.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's that challenge of, what are my three messages? And then how do I know they're for real? I think I was sharing some things with you about, I think this is the problem with executives. This is the main issue is out there. And we're always looking for what is the main problem. I suppose you have to lock in on what that is before you can get to those three messages that solve it.
Yeah, and I think that's why it goes back. The previous piece is understanding our audience and the transformation they need to make.
Okay.
Because you can't figure out those three pillars until you realize what I'm trying to do is get people from A to Z over here, and there are some steps they need to take. But if I haven't thought that through, and I just want to shout out how brilliant I am or how amazing my company is, you're not helping people transform. You're helping people think you're a braggart or you're full of yourself, which is not really what we want.
No. And speaking of that, I was going to ask you about executive branding. And is there a difference between, in your mind, executive branding and thought leadership? Are these just marketing terms? Is one a component of the other? Any thoughts on that?
I do think I think that executive branding is a component of thought leadership. So what I try to help people see is that there's sort of a journey. You begin in your career, you're starting to establish yourself with a particular brand. Like, this person is more this than that. She stands for this and not for that. That is a particular brand. But the second piece on the journey is to really establish that you have a reputation around what you know. So now it's really more, I know you as this expert in outbound marketing. And so that is different from the fact that I know you as a sharp guy with excellent communication skills, et cetera, right? So those, I think, are different. And then the third piece is this idea of being able to communicate bigger, broader messages is not necessarily about your expertise. Your expertise may be AI, or your expertise may be manufacturing, and you're known as that person. But then if we can add on the skill of being able to communicate effectively, taking people on the journey of transformation, that's somewhat of a different skill set, and not one we ever learned in college. So when I was teaching at Stanford this course in thought leadership, my classroom was interestingly filled with people, some of whom were already true thought leaders in their space. And we really talked about this transition from being someone who was very good at talking about what they know and deeply telling me everything, every detail about their particular area of expertise, and being someone others want to listen to, and others want to follow, and others want to quote, and others want to see as that leader of the future. That's different than being an expert. Right? I don't necessarily need deep expertise in AI to be someone who is going to be able to help us see the future of AI.
And what is that little subtle, it's probably a significant shift in how they're communicating. As I hear you say this, my thought is they're probably an expert in what they know. They like to talk about it, but they're not really thinking about their customers and what they need to do and how this could help them out. Is that one of the components that you use to help them make that switch? Like, what did you teach those people who are sitting in your class who are saying, Denise, help me, I am this expert, but how do I move the masses?
Well, I even had this conversation with a client about 3 weeks ago. He is an AI expert, but he comes from academia, and what he struggles with is that he gets in front of an audience of whatever kind, and he goes deep very fast, and
Yep.
he uses technical jargon, and he is very, I don't know, it feels pedantic to me when I listen to him. Like, I
Mhm.
am very smart and I want you to think I'm very smart. So we came up with this term about being folksy. Like, how can you be
Mm.
more folksy? How can you be someone that communicates in a way that others are actually taking in the knowledge, not just thinking you're smart, but you're helping them to get more knowledge, to help them to learn. And there is a group of people who can't make that shift. I have absolutely had those kinds of clients, and they can't make the shift because they're telling themselves how important it is to be smart and to seem smart. And thought leadership isn't necessarily all about being smart. It helps, but it's not.
Mhm.
It is not really what we're doing here. But the second is that there's another element of this that I see with some leaders is that they aren't very good at getting out of the background. Like, they've spent their whole career being a
Mm.
support person, even if they have a big title, but they aren't someone who understands about setting vision. They're not someone who has language in which they think forward. They're very focused on today. They're very focused on the
Mhm.
task. They're very focused on what needs to happen. And that doesn't help them. They need this other set of language and this other set of presentation skills. So this is why my work is so interesting, right? Because people come to me with a lot of different challenges, and for their organizations or for their own individual journey. And so we have to tease apart what is it that's holding them back, and what is it that's holding their initiatives back, and how can we put in some new building blocks? Is it new training? Is it speaking skills? Is it a new way of messaging? Is it understanding more about their audience? Is it testing? There's a lot of different things that we can do to start to tweak things in order to get better at this. And no one's perfect, but you have to get out there and try. So much of it is practice.
Denise, do you think it's important for people, CEOs, executives, to be more out in front of their all their efforts, their communication efforts, and to no longer be that invisible CEO or the CEO in the background, but to take a leadership role and kind of be the get up on the bully pulpit and share these ideas? It
Yes.
seems to me, okay, tell me why.
Yes, simple. Yeah, I had a mentor once. He did this whole study in his retirement about what is true leadership. And he came out with this model, VRE, Vision, Relationships, Execution, that he says we start our careers at being very good at executing. And many people go through their whole lives, and that's all they're really good at is they can get it, they roll up their sleeves, they can get it done. And they can,
Mhm.
the second step is relationships. So we can figure out how to get things done through others. But the third is being that visionary, being the person who helps people see the future, helps people to get excited about where we're headed. For me, that is a piece of true thought leadership, is to be that person who can do the V section of their leadership journey. And so being that invisible CEO who sits in their office quietly, working on whatever they're good at, that's not true leadership, right? We need all of the above. And so either that or they need a really strong right-hand person who has that skill set. But I think that the thought leadership is also communicating internally. Even when you're on an external stage, you're helping your organization to see the future that they should all be working towards. So the more you can articulate that future and help people to align to it, the more you're aligning your own organization to on the journey with you. That's my take.
And do you think, though, that the timeliness of that viewpoint that you just shared? I mean, I think you could say that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you could have brought up that point. But it seems we're in a different time in some ways, with more people looking more to influencers. We're seeing our political leaders more engaged and upfront on social media. We're seeing this rise in AI, and people having less trust in corporations and institutions. Is this a point now where thought leadership is really needed more than ever before?
That is certainly my belief, and that it is in some ways to counter some of the influencer voices, which are often leading us astray. These are most of the time, the research shows that CEOs, interestingly enough, in this country are still the most trusted over financial institutions, over churches, over political leaders. So if you have that trust, the more you can utilize that trust to weave our communities back together, to use your bully pulpit in ways that build trust back. I think that this skill set is more important than ever. And I'm not talking about using your bully pulpit to necessarily talk about cultural issues. Talk about it's happening in your field. Talk about what's happening as you're bringing in new technologies to transform your industry. Maybe stay away from some of the more difficult topics right now where you can get the attacks happening. But that doesn't mean you need to be quiet. And it doesn't need to mean that you can't talk about how to build a great culture in your company, how to attract the right talent to your doors. Those are all things that are evergreen and we need to always be talking about.
Wow. Love it. We are at the top of the hour, Denise. I really enjoyed this conversation. We really covered some valuable ground. And thank you so much for joining us. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, wants to work with you, how do they do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn under my name and also at thoughtleadershiplab.com.
Okay. Denise Brosseau, thank you so much again. And thank you everyone for joining us on Thought Leaders Live.
Thanks, Greg.